It was nearing the end of my shift at the small diner I worked at. The place wasn't anything fancy, just a cozy little spot where regulars would come for coffee and burgers. Weeknights were always slow, and I was the only one on duty since the cook had left early. By 11 p.m., the place was dead quiet, and I was already counting the minutes until I could lock up and head home. At 11:45, just as I was about to flip the open sign to closed, the door swung open. A man walked in. He was tall, maybe mid-40s, with messy hair and clothes that looked like they'd been slept in for days. Something about him put me on edge immediately. He didn't say anything as he made his way to the farthest booth in the corner, sitting down with his back to the door. "Kitchen's almost closed," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't respond. Instead, he just sat there, staring at the table in front of him. After a moment, he finally lifted his hand and gestured for me to come over. I grabbed my notepad and walked over, trying not to let my unease show. "What can I get for you?" I asked. He looked up at me with tired, bloodshot eyes. His face was pale, almost sickly. "Just coffee," he said quietly. His voice was hoarse, like he hadn't spoken in days. I nodded and went back behind the counter to pour him a cup. When I brought it over, he was staring out the window now, though the street outside was empty. "Anything else?" I asked. "Number just coffee," he murmured. I walked back to the counter and tried to busy myself cleaning up, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I glanced at the clock, 11:55. Almost closing time. The man still hadn't touched his coffee. When the clock struck midnight, I decided it was time to ask him to leave. I walked back to the booth, but when I got there, he was gone. The coffee cup sat untouched, and on the table was a single $5 bill. I looked toward the door. It hadn't opened. There was no sound of footsteps. He couldn't have just left without me noticing. Feeling a chill creep up my spine, I picked up the bill. That's when I noticed the date printed on it. It was from 1997, and written across the back of the bill, in faded ink, was a single phrase: "Thank you for waiting." I never saw the man again. But that night, as I was closing up, I checked the security footage out of curiosity. There was no one sitting in that booth. Just an empty diner, and me, pouring coffee for no one.